Greetings, Rays community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, Mike Goodwin, retired. But there's more to Mike's story than that. Mike Goodwin was most recently the president and CEO of the Oregon State University Foundation. He has served as the chair of the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, aka CASE's board. Mike has served in leadership roles at Georgetown University, and we will cover a lot of that today. But first, I just want to say welcome, Mike. Thank you.
Hey, great. It's great to be with you, Brent. So thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that we've enjoyed understanding about leaders like yourself in the advancement community is the path to get there, right? Very few of us are in middle school saying, my dream is to be a leader in philanthropy someday. But inevitably, along the way, something strikes us, we get exposed to it, it leads us down this path. And my understanding is that your upbringing, and I want to take it way back to start, was really under the tutelage of Coach Goodwin. So tell me about where you were, and and tell me about Coach Goodwin and just a little bit about that time in your life.
Yeah, how'd you learn that? That's really amazing. So my dad was a really well-known and highly regarded teacher and coach in the Seattle area. He worked at the Jesuit school there. And so, as you might expect, I mean, education was sort of the family business. He'd come home at night, and my mom too was very involved in it. And so the conversations would be about things that had happened, kids that had, sort of progressed and changed through their work at the school, that kind of thing. So it was just that there was kind of a constant message. And I go back to, as I was thinking about this, the CASE motto of education transforming lives, the power of education to transform lives and society. And it was just like, that was every night at our house, just talking about that. And then of course, going to football games on the weekend, which were a big deal. So yeah, it was fun. It was a great place to grow up.
And so as it came time for you to make your own college choice, tell me about Mike Goodwin, junior year of high school. What were you thinking through, and ultimately what led you to the University of San Francisco?
Well, kids didn't look at 50 colleges like so much happens today. So if you looked at 3 or 4, it was a lot. So in my backyard, the UW was great, Seattle University, but then, the Jesuits sent this slick recruiter into Seattle Prep one night representing the University of San Francisco. He was really good. And, what sold me on that was the chance that I might, it was a chance to get away from home, financial aid, but also a chance to play football, which I did for the first year, because I certainly wasn't good enough to go to any higher level of competition for that. And my friends and family all like to note that the school dropped football shortly after I left there. So they're not sure if there's a connection to that or not. But
tell me more about that slick recruiter, because I do feel like it is the kindred spirit of the slick development officers who are listening to this this show. What is the difference between that experience and fundraising?
That's a great question. I mean, there really wasn't much difference. He sort of painted the vision, described the product, sold it, and asked for the order. And, by the end of that evening, after listening to him, I was pretty much ready to sign on for whatever they had to offer. It was a great presentation.
We don't know a lot about the enrollment world at EverTrue. We just haven't had too much exposure to it. But occasionally we hear this kind of narrative of the influential, coach that sold me, or that enrollment, the admissions officer that sold me on USF in your case. And it does feel like there are, what is the difference between our, USF's marketing materials were what they were, right? Yeah. The school was what it was, but the difference was a human being connecting with another human being, and it shaped your life. And I think that is really the difference between, right, the donations that come in on a giving day and all the ones that don't, because it's not quite enough. And so that's where the human intervention really can make a difference.
No, that's really well said, I think, Brent. Another part of that experience, when I got that scholarship from USF for the first time, there was something with it that had like a real person's name in it, that because I didn't have a clue up until that point that there was actually a real person behind this scholarship who was interested enough and
Mm-hmm.
someone like me who they didn't even know to help finance my education. And what that really sunk in, and that really, I mean, that was a seed that didn't germinate for many years, as you know, but once it did, it was a powerful experience. And I think that kind of relates to what you're saying.
Well, we're not going to talk age on this podcast, but just to set a little bit of context, when Mike showed up at USF, the number one song on the Billboard charts was California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas. So it's fitting that Mike was California Dreaming and made his trip down that way. Tell me about the highlights. It sounds like football was a part of the experience. My understanding is that you studied English while you were at USF. At what point did you start thinking about the master's program that you ultimately pursued right after USF?
Yeah, I studied English, and as I got out of football, I got into the school paper, and after a year or two there, became the editor of that. So that was a pretty formative experience as well. But there was the USF had a terrific English department, and there were a couple of professors who just really engaged me and really got me interested in that. So I thought, much to the chagrin of my parents, who wanted me to go into law school or to get an MBA or something like that, and they were actually smarter than I was at that point, I decided to pursue the graduate degree. And my original intent was to get a doctorate at the University of Washington. But after a couple of years of doing that, I realized that doing the research and the kinds of things that you need to do to be a tenured faculty member, that just wasn't the path that was appealing to me. So I decided to cut it off and move over to the family business, so to speak, which was teaching at the high school level and coaching football and working with their newspaper and that sort of thing. So that was sort of the path.
But it was, look, we've had a lot of folks who, one way or another, directly move from their undergraduate experience into the advancement world. That was less common, right? The professionalization of advancement has occurred in part thanks to your leadership, but it was a different environment, I know, at that point. And unlike a lot of our other guests, you actually started your career outside of the philanthropy world. Tell us about some of the other areas that you worked in before.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You could do things when I was starting out that people can't do today. I mean, so when you look around today, you look around for who has experience when you're hiring someone, and you're so you have to start and you have to get the experience, and at whatever level it is. And that just wasn't the case when I started. Again, not talking about dates or anything like that. But so after the teaching and coaching for a few years, I decided that wasn't quite it either. Really valued what went on there, but there was just this sort of, I wanted to learn more about business and finance. And I had a family, so I couldn't go out and get the graduate degree at that point. So I started selling real estate. A friend of mine had a brokerage and talked me into doing that. It was a great experience because I learned through that process many of the skills that I later needed in development. You need how to work with prospects, how to work with prospective buyers, how to close a sale when you need to do that, or a donation, the finance aspect of it, the legal aspect of it. I mean, those were all there in real estate. Mm-hmm. And that was, who knows, I could have stayed in that career, but I could tell that wasn't quite it either. And then, people now we've had a lot of inflation going on in the economy now, talk of a recession. And that was kind of going on in 1980, 81, when the Fed raised interest rates from 8 to 16% sort of overnight. And that just shut down the real estate business for a year or two. So I was looking at that point for, what else can I do? And this, after a lot of kind of looking into it, saw that there were schools out there that needed help at this. And I thought maybe I could transfer the skills that I had to that environment. So kind of a long answer, but that's kind of the path.
I'm not sure that we've ever really talked the similarities between real estate and fundraising, sales and fundraising, certainly. But you kind of transitioned out of real estate into fundraising, what school was that at?
It was at a brand new school, independent Catholic high school in the Bellevue area outside of Seattle. It's now moved to another part of the East Side, and now it's probably 35, 40 years old, a very successful school. But at that point,
my understanding, and I just want to make
yeah,
sure that
yeah.
everybody hears this. My understanding is it's in Sammamish, Washington, and the only reason I know how to pronounce that word is because we stayed on the banks of Lake Sammamish in our RV on the trip. So
No kidding. Wow.
there
Wow.
you
At the
go.
state
Yeah.
park, then, probably. I'm guessing at the state park.
I don't know if it was state park
Yeah.
or some sort of really cool city park,
Yeah.
but we were
Yeah.
right on the banks
Well, it's
of Lake Sammamish.
all rural. Well, it's a beautiful place then, as you saw and know. And the east side of Seattle is where the tech, it's
Yeah.
kind of the Silicon Valley North. So there were tons of people with resources there. The Nordstrom family was part of our school. So it was a great opportunity to learn how to work with people and develop as a development officer.
Tell me a little bit, if you think about,
Yeah.
one of the things about the real estate world, right, is deals move fast, right? It's a 45-day close on what is oftentimes the biggest purchase in somebody's life. What was it like going from that, I don't know, pace, intensity to development where we, of course, want speed, but you've got to balance speed with lifelong relationships. It's a different dynamic. Did that throw you for a loop, or was it a pretty natural transition?
No, that's a really good question. I think it's a pretty natural transition. I mean, one of the things that I learned in real estate is patience, and that people will be ready when they're ready, when they see the house that they want, and it's the time that's right for them to buy. And so you can't really you have to work with a number of people at one time. You can't count on just having one sale and seeing that through. And I think that's true in development, that you have sometimes, the gifts that we work on they're not usually closed in a month or two. It's sometimes 2 or 3 years that we're working on these things. So you have to have a number of them that you're working on at the same time, sort of strategically. So I think that was a really good lesson from working in the commercial market.
And leading the team in the sort of small Catholic school, independent
Mm-hmm.
school environment, a lot of times folks that work in that independent school environment, which it sounds like was a part of your childhood as well, really latch onto it, and that becomes your career path. Like, I could have seen another version of Mike Goodwin's career that was independent school advancement leadership, but ultimately you made the move to higher education, and it had to be a completely different environment, going from a small tight-knit community in Sammamish to Pullman, Washington. So tell me about the move to Washington State. What led you to do that?
Well, mostly Connie Kravis and Stan Schmidt, but because I'd met them through Case, and they were sort of notorious for recruiting people, and I got on their radar somehow, and so we started to talk, and they said, "Hey, why don't you come over and join us? We have this director of gift planning position coming up," which is another example of how you could move in those days, because I was certainly not a seasoned director of gift planning. This sort of thing would never happen today. But it took probably 6 months to make that decision, because, as you say, it was hard. Those independent school communities are very close. You learn a lot. You're much closer to the students and the action, so to speak, than when you move to a big research university like WSU. But then there's other things at a place like WSU that sort of counteract that and benefit you. So it's a tough decision. And Connie and Stan did a great job of selling it.
Well, I feel like I have been sold on Washington State for the last several years, because one of my colleagues, Kevin Massimino, was the student body vice president there, and then served on the board of regents, and has waved Old Crimson countless times, and is an absolute fanatic and deserves a shout out for sure. So I feel like, while my Brown affiliation gets a lot of credit, in the ever true story, Washington State is high on that list, as I think about institutions that have meant a lot to my teammates. Tell me about some of those early days, after you made that move, just getting on the road, meeting donors, selling maybe a new mission, right? I mean, a mission that you didn't necessarily have a personal connection to, somebody else's product, if you will. But it sounds like Connie and team recruiting you, had you pretty fired up out of the gates. I mean, what What stands out about some of those early donor visits?
Gosh, there was a lot to learn. I mean, they threw me right into it. I think within the first few days of being on. Huh?
Actually, take me right back to, like, what did
Yeah.
they give you? Like, when we think about, equipping someone for success, what did you actually get?
Well, they threw me right into it. So I think, I went over thinking, well, they know I don't know a lot about gift planning, so they're going to give me some time to study up and learn on this before I do anything. And so I'd been there about 2 days, and Connie walked down and she dropped into my office and said, "We got reunion coming up this weekend, and here's 3 or 4 people that have contacted us about wanting to do planned gifts." So God, I was up till like midnight for 3 days in a row studying up on gift annuities and the rest, so I could meet with these people and have a reasonable conversation with them. But it was just, that experience of getting right into it was really, really great, because I think, and then, there were the courses that you went to, the Bob Sharps and so forth. But it was just the immediacy of the experience and being able to get right after it. And I think I was on a call with the president, Sam Smith, within 2 weeks of being on the job. And I was like, Sam's great to run into, very easy to work with, but I never worked with the university president before, and I was like scared to death as to what this experience would be like. But it was great. The donors loved WSU. It was clear that this would be an easy product to sell, that people had a great experience at Washington State University. And in that case, that was long enough ago, again, not to date myself, but that a lot of the people that you worked with in gift planning had come through the Great Depression. And so their experiences getting through college were pretty remarkable to share, where they were, kind of snitching vegetables from a farmer's field to eat and that kind of a thing. And had gone on to have great wealth in their lives, but now they just wanted to share and give that back. So it was easy to make the transition and to see, again, the impact of the transformative impact that education has on lives and society.
Any of those early planned gift conversations stand out, or maybe there were moments when you started to realize, hey, I love this. I mean, I love this work. It could really be a longer term path for me.
Well, I mean, they were all good. It's another good question, but one that I was thinking about getting ready for this call was there was an older gentleman who lived in a very remote corner of Northeast Washington. I don't know if you've ever been up there. It's beautiful territory. It's, probably 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive from Pullman. So I went up there, met with him, started to walk through what would happen with the gift annuity, I think was the product, and thinking I would go back to the office and write a proposal and send it to him. And he said, "Wait a minute, I'm going to go up. I need to go upstairs for something." And he came back down and he had $800,000 in negotiable securities that he handed to me. And these, I could have gone to Mexico with these. I mean, they're probably worth $2 or $3 million at least today. And it was just such, I was scared to death driving back that, I needed an armored vehicle or something to be with me. But it was just such an experience, and what the power of the brand of WSU was, and the trust that people put in knowing that I was an employee of WSU, that this guy would put that kind of trust in me. And there were, I could probably share many other stories like that, but it's just, higher education really had a powerful impact on people, and they really trusted and believed in it.
So essentially, somebody gave you $800,000 of cash.
Essentially, yeah. I could have gone to Mexico.
If anybody listening has received more than $800,000 in cash, direct from a donor, please share in our anonymous tip line. But no, that is memorable, Mike, for sure. And I look, you've already brought it up, right? You're talking about the case mission. You're talking about the impact of education in a post-depression world. And, we got plenty of challenges out there today, but I feel like as a sector, there is a lot of negativity around student loans. And I've talked about this before, student loans or the cost of tuition. And it seems like that really drowns out these amazing transformational, life-changing stories that you're describing, hearing about in the early 80s, to the same ones that we hear about today, to the way that my life was changed by higher education. And it just seems like there are so many more of those amazing stories that go untold at the expense of the headline about tuition or student loans.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's been a real change that we've seen over the last many, many years. And it's something our sector probably needs to take seriously. I know there's efforts at CASE. You heard about this at the AGB conference. I think Sue Cunningham talked about it, and there was some conversation about it. But I think it's a beginning, but probably not everything that we need in terms of sort of reversing the perceptions of our sector that are out there right now. Because I think, as you point out, when you meet with students, and we were at a student gathering here last night in Corvallis, and you talk to them and you talk about their individual stories, they're just remarkable. And the things that you and I experienced are still happening. And we just, we need to make sure people know that.
But what I would expect, Mike, is that when you go to that student event, all they're doing is complaining about tuition and loans. Like, that is the narrative out there right now, that it's almost like impossible that you would go to a student event where the students are like deeply grateful for the opportunity.
Well, there is that for sure, Brent. But this thing we went to last night maybe was a little different. It was scholarship recipients, so they were graduate students too. It's part of a program my wife and I have become involved in called ARCS, which you may be familiar with. It's achievement rewards for college scholars or something, but it's for graduate students to help them with their programs. And they're just, they're so fresh in their thinking and so deeply. You ask them about their research projects or what they're focusing on, and it's an education to listen to what they talk about. We were talking last night to a guy who's working in micro nuclear reactors that could be a power source for the future, and just lots of things like that just really make you believe in what you're doing here. So
love it.
Yeah,
love it. And it's got to be very rewarding to be the donor as well, right? To experience philanthropy on that side of the table, and stewardship, and events like last night.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, it really, being on the other side helps you a lot. I mean, when I got, and I'd say the same thing with CASE. I'm now chair of a board of Medical Teams International, and it's based out of Oregon. And when you're on that side of it, it's a whole different way of seeing the industries that we're involved in, and sort of understanding then when you're the staff person, how what your volunteer leadership needs. So it's been great.
So it's the early 90s. You grew up in the Northwest. You went California dreaming. You are now in Pullman. You're having a lot of success. You're chairing CASE District 8. You are all in the Pacific Northwest. And then, of course, it makes sense to move to Washington, D.C. and take a role at Georgetown. Not exactly what I saw coming. What led to that?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about that, and frequently, especially when I got them while we were living in DC, it was like, this must have been really a hard move to make, to come from, a place like Pullman to Washington, DC. It was actually a lot harder to go from Seattle to Pullman than it was to go from Pullman to DC. But that was a recruitment. I have a lot of Jesuit background, as you know, with USF, and going to a Jesuit high school. My wife does too. So we were pretty familiar with the product and what we would entail there. And, great university, obviously, great city to live in. And we sort of fell in love with the place. And when you walk on that campus, it's so impressive. And I'm sure you've been there a time or two, but so that plus the VP there was just great. And, I think we were talking about mentors at some point, but Kathy Jones, who had been at UC Irvine and then went, like a year before I got there, came back to Georgetown, great sense of humor, really an effective leader and manager. And I learned a ton working with Kathy and had a lot of fun doing it. So the agreement was that if things worked out, she didn't want to work forever as vice president, and that she would set me up to kind of, if things went well, move on to succeed her, which that's essentially what happened.
Well, along the way, I know that you started collaborating with the dream team that was Georgetown Advancement at that time, and at least I know Matthew Lambert was somewhere on the
Yeah,
org chart at that point, and I posted Matthew on the Raise podcast, and I know you all built some pretty innovative things there as well.
Yeah, I think Matthew was fresh out of Ohio State when he was at Georgetown, so it was great to have him on board. And man, did he had a lot to the program. Joe Kender, who went on to Lehigh, and I think he's at St. Joseph's now. Sean Scoville, of course, who's running the program here at Oregon State. Kevin Heaney, who's running the program at Princeton after spending some time here at Oregon State. I could go on and on. Jeff Comfort, who's been a leader nationally in gift planning. It's just been that was a great crew to work with. And Kathy was great, kind of giving me the freedom, or us the freedom, to recruit and just go out and try to bring some people with real creativity, talent, and vision into the program.
Can I ask, during your time at Georgetown, so as a point of reference for our listeners, Mike joined Georgetown in 1994 and he left in 2004. And so when you joined, I'm going to guess that you didn't get an email address on your first day. I'm going to guess that there were very limited technologies at your disposal, at your team's disposal in the mid 90s. I bet that changed a lot by the time you left in 2004. And there were probably some awkward periods in between where questions were asked like, is it okay to email a donor? Can we email a proposal?
Yeah. Right.
And I'm just curious if you think about that being the core kind of .com 1.0 boom, what your perspective was, or if you recall any moments when you started to see technology playing a bigger role, or maybe it didn't matter that much.
No, it really transformed a lot just during that short tenure. I mean, you may have heard this story before, but I think Grant Spot-Glier had been working in the environment before I got there, and they were doing some good stuff. I asked, and some of it involved technology, but I asked for, like the first week I got there, one of the things I wanted to see was a list of major donors, thinking that I could get an Excel spreadsheet or I don't know, something along those lines, electronic, that would be pretty easy to pull up. So this takes like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And when I finally get it, it's like a big box with all these printouts that have come off that old type of printer that had the edges and all of that. And it was like, oh God, this is going to be, at Washington State, we were more advanced than that by some degree. So, it's just a case of Georgetown having some legacy systems, now acknowledging that they needed to change that, now going through the painful process of upgrading it to, I forget which one we were using, but we were in the process of doing that. And email, yeah, I mean, it was, email was a much more formal thing back then. I mean, you know how today you send texts and you do all of that, and maybe your spelling isn't always as good. Siri might catch it, but she doesn't always. But then if you made a mistake in an email in those days, to a faculty member especially, you'd get a nastygram about, how can you represent us when you just sent me this email and there's 2 misspellings in it. And I said, dude, I'm just trying to, this is a new form of communication. But
right,
there was a lot of that sort of evolution that you had to go through. But starting by 2004, so when I left to come out here, it was, the momentum was clearly there, and it was clear that we had to push ahead as an industry.
Mike, I actually love the fact that, in spite of the lack of technology, you all improved results during your time at Georgetown. And there's at least one bullet point in your resume, and I won't hold you to the exact data, but where the productivity of major gift officers grew from $800,000 to $3 million. Okay. Those numbers aside, it wasn't through tech. You didn't have technology to lean on. And so in the absence of technology being some sort of crazy differentiator, what were the things that you did that helped create that before and after? If it wasn't the whiz bang, CRM.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it wasn't the whiz bang CRM. You know how you can sit down today and have a firm like any one of the major consulting firms will go through your portfolios and tell you which how well your gift officers are doing in terms of matching up with the top prospect base. So we didn't, and then you do some reassignment based on that. We didn't have any ability to do that sort of thing. So you had to kind of work with what was there in front of you. But I think a lot of what I learned during real estate and managing a portfolio there was applicable here. So, and also at Washington State. So you just sat down. I spent a lot of time working individually with development officers and just, going through trying to find out where the log jams were, what can we do to break through those log jams, just doing a lot of coaching and encouragement. And then Kathy was really good about I learned a lot from Kathy, but one of the primary things was when you have performance issues, you have to manage those performance issues, because if you don't manage the performance issues, it sends a message to the rest of the organization that you're just not serious about the discipline of the organization. So we did that in a few cases, which enabled us an opportunity to bring some different people in, different skill sets, and also you might say motivated the people that were still in the organization. So it's that kind of thing, I think.
What's an example of the kind of, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 log jams that you saw then, or that you might expect to see today holding us back? Because, the donor population is the donor population. People are who they are in their portfolios, but it sounds like our specific, roadblocks that are preventing development officers from breaking through and building the relationship and securing the revenue.
Well, I think it goes to, if I could give a plug to another company that does work in this field, Advancement Resources, I think does a great job of training development officers around the very issue that you're talking about. And a lot of occasions it would come back to not really having conversations with the donors where you would understand what the donor's motivation was and what might be preventing them from making the gift. So really improving our skill set around that. And I think that was pretty key to the conversations we had at Georgetown. It's like, okay, what's holding you up? Why is the donor not doing this? What are they trying to accomplish? That kind of thing. So I think that's been a real change, is the increasing sophistication in the training and the ability that our advancement officers have as they go out to meet with donors and have these kinds of conversations. But still, it's not always perfect, and we're not always perfect, and we're not always great listeners. So those logjams still occur.
Yeah. And I don't know the origins of the opportunity at Oregon State, but tell me more about what led you to head back to the Northwest.
Well, it was kind of a family decision. The campaign was done at Georgetown. It wasn't clear when the next campaign would be. So we weren't totally sure whether we wanted to stay there. Our kids had all gotten degrees at Georgetown, so we'd kind of gone through that process, and we'll be forever grateful to Georgetown for that, because they just got great educations there, including one who got a medical degree from Georgetown, or 2 actually that got medical degrees from Georgetown. So it was more, Sheila's family's in the Bay Area, mine is in the Seattle area. We wanted to get back to a major research university on the West Coast that would allow us more proximity to our families. So Oregon State was the one that was open at that point. Went out and wasn't quite sure what would happen or how it would go, but I met Ed Ray, who's the president I worked for until he retired about a year ago. He came out here as a provost from Ohio State. You've met him, I think, haven't you, Brent, when you've been out here? Great guy, very, very down to earth, occasionally a little crusty in his language. But just, you couldn't work for a more supportive person as far as somebody wanted to lead advancement and be a part of advancement. So that was really a big part of the attraction. Plus, it's a great place to live.
It is a great, if you haven't been to that part of the country, if you haven't been to Corvallis, it's just a great college town. I grew up in Iowa. It reminds me of Ames, Iowa, a little bit, where Iowa State University is, except no offense to my farmer friends, but much better scenery. And
yeah, we got
plenty of
the
farms.
easy drive to the ocean and the mountains and skiing, and there is the wine tasting that's pretty good these days too. So
Yeah.
great place to live.
So when you got there, I know that at that time, Oregon State was raising roughly 30, 40 million a year. And along the way, as part of your campaign, you blasted through that $100 million threshold. Was that one of those, I don't know, big, hairy, audacious goals? Or was there like, it's just a number, but it's a nice round number that not a lot of folks get to shoot for in the sector.
Yeah.
Was that, or maybe the broader campaign milestone being at that $1 billion level? I mean, how important were just the round numbers in rallying the team towards the goals?
Well, I was fortunate, I think, that I'd been at Washington State, which is a pretty similar place in terms of their graduate population and the academic programs that they have. So I could look through what the colleges and athletics were raising here and see that there was a lot of room compared to Washington State for improvement. And then kind of scanning through what was available in terms of donors, you could see that there were some opportunities there too. So it's like, but it's, anytime you have a couple 100,000 people on your list of friends, there's going to be some folks, as you well know, that have capacity on that list. So it's, I think one of the, again, talking about mentors, Martin Grenzebach has been a great mentor in some respects. And one of his mantras is when you go into a situation like that, you just work the process. And so we just worked the process of discovery and visits and getting out to see people, and had a confidence that if we did that, we would be successful. And it turned out to be true. I think they're up to 150, 160, 170 million or something like that now. So Sean, shout out to Sean. He's doing a great job.
When you're working with the sheer numbers that you were working with then, and really embarking upon what my understanding was, a heavily discovery oriented campaign, there had to be some unexpected gifts or donors that maybe came out of the woodwork that were just totally off the radar. Does anything stand out in that regard, or was it mostly, working with the known set of supporters and getting them to stretch further?
No, there were a lot of those kind of unknown gifts, surprises, you might say. It's interesting. A couple of the biggest were in the College of Veterinary Medicine. People, as you know, love their animals, and one came early on, and it was kind of a fun gift because, among other things, we became the owners of a ferry boat company, which turned out to be worth $6 million or so. But we actually
these are the stories our audience really wants, Mike. So tell me about other strange gifts or the ferry boat ownership, how that works.
Well, some of them may, if they've gone from the state of Washington to Canada, they may have been on this ferry boat. It crosses from Port Angeles to Victoria. And so, it's like a running enterprise. We ended up retaining the crew and so forth to operate for us. And, we just, once a quarter, our CFO was up meeting with the board of the ferry boat company. But eventually we sold that. Another gift, this is, I think, a good lesson.
This might be the first time, though, that I've heard on this podcast that somebody that you actually just owned a company for a while. I mean, it's not exactly that's like private equity meets running a foundation.
Yeah, no, we had a similar situation at Washington State where there's a famous seafood company you may have gone to when you're in Seattle called Ivar's, down in the waterfront, famous for chowder and that kind of thing. And Ivor left that company to Washington State in his will. So I got to see how Stan and Schmidt, especially, who was kind of the business genius, operated that and dealt with that. And we had the same CFO that we'd had at Washington State who'd been through that whole process. I recruited him over to Oregon State. So it's really fun to be able to sort of duplicate that experience. But then the other, a really interesting and I think telling story is was a $50 million gift to the College of Veterinary Medicine. And this was someone who lived in Southern California, that was on the database. And we could see that he had capacity at least to make $1 million gift. So people kept going down and, kind of pitching their programs. He had multiple interests. Would you give us $1 million for the campaign? And he kept saying, no, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in animals. So finally, after spending a lot of time with him, Jeff Comfort took the head of veterinary medicine down there, and they just melded. It was a great meeting, and it was, pretty quickly that they moved into conversations after that about his estate and how that might be directed to support the college. And it ended up being a $50 million gift to name the college. So it's just, again, it gets back to that point we were talking about earlier of really, we often go in with our objectives of I need to close a gift for the campaign. But if you really listen, which Jeff is really great at, you discern what people are all about, basically.
Mike, can I ask in that case,
yeah.
why 50? Why not 40? Why not 60? I mean, how do you land when you're talking about such stratospheric numbers? You've still got to land on a specific number. It's a little easier back in your real estate days where this is the house, this is what it's listed for. Do you want to come in above or below? We can negotiate on the margin.
Yeah.
But going from a whole bunch of, will you give $1 million? No, I won't. That doesn't strike me. But if you get the pitch right, I'll give 50. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, well, we went into, Jeff went into a lot of exploration of what his assets were. And it was partially, liquid assets, stocks and the like, but partially quite a bit of real estate, which led to a lot of interesting exploration in terms of, was it valued correctly? And would we really be able to get what we thought we could get from it when we obtained it? But yeah, it just, he didn't have children, family. He didn't have anything else he wanted to do with his money. And he just really locked onto this idea of supporting animals. And it grew, pretty quickly from that to the vision of 50 million.
I am remembering a dinner that I had in Seattle at one point at a conference with one of your former colleagues, and I cannot for the life of me remember her name nor track her down in the background here on LinkedIn. But I do know that she was a development officer for the veterinarian school, for the vet school. And we were just going around the table asking about, I don't know, unique experiences, or we asked everybody as an icebreaker to sort of share the craziest gift that they had been a part of. And what I did not appreciate until that moment, and now I have to ask you the same question, is how often vet school fundraisers are in barns raising money, which makes total sense. But she was referring to a time specifically when I think she helped a prospect like deliver a sheep or something like that. And it was just not exactly
I don't know about that one.
Not exactly the ivory tower, sitting across the table vision that you might think of. So, when you think about your own road warrior moments, anything stand out in just, I don't know, unique settings? I mean, I guess being on a ferry boat certainly is one of them.
Well, no sheep stories, but, I mean, that's a great part about a land grant university is that you have all these fascinating programs, like that, or engineering where you can see a lot of things, or agriculture. And the first, few weeks or so I was on the job at Washington State, I think the College of Ag guy had me pegged as a city slicker. So he wanted to take me out to meet with some of his donors who were on the most remote wheat farm in the Palouse that I think I've ever seen. And we drove for 50 miles and there was nothing but wheat fields around there. But it was put on your jeans, put on your boots, take off your tie, go in there and rely. And it's just, that's what's great about a land grant university is you can do everything from that to visiting very successful financial or legal people down in downtown Seattle. It's just a great variety but no sheep, unfortunately.
I love it. Well, I will try to track her down later and apologize, but it was one that stood out. That stood out for me. Tell me a little bit about the team. You built a very strong team that has lasted at Oregon State. I mean, I know you've retired a couple of years ago, but I think at a time when it seems like every, EAB or consulting report is about turnover, you were able to recruit a very strong team that has been consistent.
Yeah, I think what we wanted to portray was a place where there would be consistency, where you could grow your career, where you'd have a chance to possibly move up within our organization, or if not, you'd be able to go somewhere else and do great things, because look at what Kevin Heaney did, look what, that type of thing. So we wanted to create that sense. I think stability was a big part of it. I think the relationship that Ed Ray and I had was really a big part of it, and the board, because we were very much in lockstep, and people could pick up on that, because you go into, I think, regrettably, some places and you find that that's not the case. And it was probably the best thing I could hear when I do an exit interview with somebody who'd been interviewing at the place was, tell me about what you heard while you were visiting with our folks. And pretty often people would say they were really surprised, because they heard pretty much different versions of the same story each time they met with somebody. It wasn't, we really should be doing this and we're doing that. It's more of a consistent buy-in to the program. And I think when people pull together and they're working for the same objective, it's never perfect, but it really creates a wonderful environment to work in.
I'd be remiss if I didn't give Mark Koenig a shout out, who's been a long-standing partner of ours and yours. He now serves as Chief Innovation Officer at the Oregon State University Foundation. And I would just sort of love your perspective on, not only Mark, but just the fact that you were willing to advocate to your board and to dedicate space in your organization to really support innovation, but doing so in a way that was, I think, pragmatic and, focused on the task at hand, which is we got to raise the money. But, it just always felt like you were able to balance making some longer term bets while not sacrificing the short term, campaign specific objectives. And I know that, empowering Mark has been a big part of that.
Yeah, well, as you know, Mark is a little bit of a genius in this area. I mean, he's constantly sort of dissatisfied with what's going on now and kind of looking for the next thing that you need to do. Has a real eye for technology and what's sort of on the future. And we, I feel like as a profession, we've done a really good job of prioritizing major gift work and investing in that. But as you pointed out to us in the presentation you did, Brent, we're leaving a lot of money on the table because we're working with the very top of the pyramid and doing that. And there's a pretty good layer right beneath that we're not getting to, and we're not discovering, and we're never going to have it's pretty clear to me that we're never, as maybe a university or two will have the money to do this, but for most of us, we're not going to have the money to do that the way we do major gift work. So how do we do that? And how do we apply technology? How do we apply artificial intelligence? And I think the pandemic sort of accelerated some of the opportunity to do that remotely. But I'm not sure I'd like to get your perspective on that. I'm not sure we probably still totally solved that space, but there's a lot more work to be done in there to figure out how to do that. But
yeah, I mean, look, for anybody listening, if you've had any exposure to the growth of the DXO program at Evertrue and beyond in the sector, I would consider Mike sort of the godfather of that program, and that we went to him with what began as a blank PowerPoint presentation, and in collaboration with Mark Koenig tried to put some numbers behind it. But what we found was that in spite of the fact that the Oregon State University Foundation was covering, around 2% of prospects in a personalized way, $100 million a year plus was being raised. And we believe then and believe now that scaling that personalized one-to-one engagement deeper into the giving pyramid, leveraging technology, but not leaning on it too much, because ultimately it's still the human element that we know can be the difference maker. It was a difference maker for Mike going to USF or not. And it was the difference maker for the vet school getting named or not. And we believe that, even prior to the pandemic, these shifts around remote engagement were becoming clear. And so we actually partnered with Oregon State University in the summer of 2019, just as Mike was entering his last year in leadership, and in partnership with Mike and Sean Scoville and Mark Koenig, we coincidentally stood up the country's first DxO program about a minute before the pandemic. And then we went from what was we think a good idea pre-pandemic to something that has become mission critical, because we went from roughly 10 million people using Zoom in December of 2019 to over 300 million by April of 2020. We don't think there has ever been a technology adoption that was as rapid as the adoption of video communication, like the one that Mike and I are using to record this podcast right now. So I don't know where the program would be, Mike, if it weren't for the pandemic, because it went from, wait, you want to meet over Zoom? To, yeah, of course, let's meet over Zoom.
Yeah.
And I think that dynamic has, transformed the entire fundraising experience. And I spoke with Fred Van Sickle, who was talking about negotiating a $100 million gift over Zoom. Who could have possibly imagined that in 2019 as we were shaping this program?
Yeah, it was unimaginable at that point. So, but it's been transformative. But I think, and I'm not in it as much as I used to be, but I think there's probably still opportunity to dig deeper, use AI more, et cetera. So look forward to seeing. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we are coming up on time, but I would love your perspective on one topic as it relates to talent. We've got a lot of folks listening to this podcast. You wouldn't be listening if you didn't really care. If you didn't want to get a window into Mike's career, or if you didn't want him as a fundraising professional. And when you think about the best people that you've worked with, the most effective philanthropic professionals, Mike, were there common characteristics that stand out? Was it about some sort of innate skill, mission, drive? I mean, what are the things that stand out when you reflect on the best people you worked with in your career?
Yeah, it's a little all over the place because there have been so many good people, but certainly I'd start with what you just said, which is a real commitment to the mission and a real belief and passion in higher education. I mean, you have to have that, and then you bring your talents to bear on that. I think listening and really being able to understand people, and as we've talked about, know where they're at, know what's important to them, know what's going to be motivational to them. I think, if you aspire to the management side of this, I think really understanding, who you are and what your skills and strengths are as a manager. Are you somebody who's going to be more out there, visiting with the prospects, visiting with the donors, the board members, all of that, while somebody else, team with the number two that runs the shop? Or are you going to be more internal and have somebody, so how do you function in that role? What do you need to be successful in that role? And I've seen failures related to not totally understanding how to do that. So I think those kinds of things, and really an ability to work effectively and well with academic colleagues is, of course, pretty critical to it as well.
Well said, Mike. How are you keeping busy today? Favorite, any new hobbies that you've picked up in the last couple of years?
Well, I played a lot of golf right after I retired, and I got worse as the more I played, the worse I got. So I figured that wasn't it. But we're spending a lot of time in Hawaii, which we both enjoy very much. And I've done some occasional consulting here and there for friends, usually less on the campaign side or the fundraising side, but more on the board governance side. How do you work with a board? How do you develop a board? What's their role during a campaign? That kind of thing. As you know, I've become a senior fellow of AGB and do a little work occasionally with them, which is great way to stay connected with a great organization. And then this thing I've got with Medical Teams International, which is sort of a smaller, in some ways, smaller version of what Doctors Without Borders, but does sort of similar kinds of work. We have a huge, growing presence over in Poland and Moldova regarding the Ukrainian crisis, and big presence in Africa and Bangladesh and areas like that. So that's been really fascinating to be a part of that and kind of learn more about a totally different but totally fascinating sector. So yeah, it's keeping me out of trouble.
Mike, thank you so much for your just support and willingness over the years. I mean, we've been shaping this ball of clay that is Ever True, and I feel like you've had a outsized impact in giving us a chance, and I'm genuinely grateful to you for that. If there's ever anything we can do to help out with any of those pursuits, please let us know. And I guess I would ask in closing, if folks want to get in touch with you, I know you're on LinkedIn. Is there another way to reach out?
LinkedIn's probably as good as any. So I probably see that every day. So that would probably be the best way to do it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you for your
Thank you, Brent. It's great. I've enjoyed working with you. And yeah, I wish you all the best in what you're trying to do.
Well, I'll count on seeing you at the AGB conference next year. That's become just one of our really foundational conferences. And in fact, the first time we ever went was because Mark Koenig
did he get you to
invited us to, or inspired us to sponsor, or whatever it may have been. But it was it's been really fun to be able to see you regularly. And now that the world's well, in some ways at least getting back to normal, hopefully we'll count on seeing you again next January.
It's so great to be starting back that direction, isn't it? No,
yeah, it really is. Well, with that,
so yeah,
hey, folks listening, connect with Mike. Let him know that you heard about him on the podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this perspective, as Mike has as much experience as anybody. We're really grateful for your willingness to share, Mike.
No, it's been fun. Thank you, Brent.
With that, I'm going to sign off with Mike Goodwin, retired. Thanks, everybody.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.